Morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you, Jana, for joining us. Now, for those who don't know Jana, she has been attending these sessions for many years and has for a long time been a legal advisor at an organization called PPECB, which stands for Perishable Products Export Control Board, I think. And
Yes.
and she recently left that and is going to be studying in the US, and really excited for her. Um, but
Thanks, Sean.
she has got a great thirst for learning and knowledge and sharing, and her particular qualification, if I'm not mistaken, was around governance, Jana, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah,
and
that
so
would agree with governance.
yeah, and Jana pointed me to the fact that the King codes are being updated. And this has always been a fascinating topic for me, just the whole issue of governance and public supply chain management or public procurement. And so we've invited Jana to come through, share a little bit on King codes and some thoughts that she's got around governance and SCM. Over to you, Jana. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. And thanks, everyone. Thanks for your patience while I get my tech sorted. So, good morning. I think Sean has given a good introduction in terms of why we are here today. And I think looking at the King codes and public supply chain management, this was the King codes were inspired by Mandela's vision of servant leadership. So they provide a framework for governance that provides for ethics, it prioritizes accountability, and very importantly, stakeholder value. So, as you know, I'm Jana van Buren-Schele, and I'm here to hopefully show you today that we can use these principles to really elevate SCM governance and ensure that the requirements of Section 217 of the Constitution are effectively upheld. Just in terms of a quick agenda for today, so we will be looking at the King Code. So I'll unpack both King 4 and the anticipated King 5. Then we will have a look at SCM governance. So two topics in particular that I will touch on there is just the chairperson of bid committees and the role of the secretariat in the SCM process. Then I will end off with a quick conclusion, and I'd really like to open this topic up for a robust discussion at the end. So starting with the King codes, they really do set the standard for good governance, and it's considered best practice to implement. The codes were first published in 1994, and King 4 is the latest draft or the latest one that we have, which was published 2016. And we are now working with a draft of King 5, which is under review. So this has been published for comments. Comments have closed as far as I know, and we are now awaiting further news on the updates there. So there have been quite a few changes, which I will discuss a bit later on. It's important just to note that the King codes really do provide a principle-based governance framework that is applicable to any organization. This is a voluntary code, so there's no legislative requirement for entities to comply or to apply King 4, but it is considered best practice. And it's also well noting that this is a listing requirement for the JSE. Then just the current chair of the King Committee has said something that really stuck with me, and that is that corporate governance is a critical tool for strengthening public and private institutions, which both then benefit our entire economy. Diving right into King 4. So the King 4 Code was released in 2016 by the Institute of Directors, and it really emphasizes your ethical and effective leadership. So those two words come up quite often in the King Codes, and this is to achieve sustainable value creation over the long term. So it promotes good governance through ethical leadership, transparency, accountability, fostering trust, and sustainability. It encourages stakeholder confidence and societal consideration through ethical governance. And then it comprises of 17 principles, 16 of which are applicable to most entities. The 17th principle is only applicable to institutional investors. And then we also have a sector-specific supplement for both municipalities and state-owned entities. So as you can see, this really is something that public entities, departments, municipalities can apply and implement. And especially in terms of SCM governance, I do believe that this will enhance the governance within the bid committee processes. Looking at the key features of King 4, we have apply and explain, which basically means that for each of the 16 principles, there are certain practices that are set out by King that can help an organization to achieve the principle or the outcome. And when we look at apply and explain, this really is that organizations must apply the principles, and then they need to explain how these practices enable the organization to meet the principle. And these are then reported in the form of disclosures in the annual report of the entity. So it is outcomes based, and it focuses on ethical culture, good performance, effective control, and legitimacy. So it's not just a tick box where you have to comply with certain things. It is up to the entity to look at the principle, look at the practices, and see what practically can work for them in order to meet the recommended principle. Then corporate citizenship is a very big focus of King 4. And this means that an organization really forms an integral part of our society, and especially the society within which they operate directly. And that organization, therefore, then has certain responsibilities towards that society, as well as the natural environment which that society relies on or depends on. And organizations have to operate within that context to support the society, or at least not harm the society within which they operate. Another very important aspect of King 4 is stakeholder inclusivity. So it's moved away just from shareholders and included a more broader perspective in terms of stakeholder. And it balances stakeholder needs with sustainable outcomes, both for the business and for the stakeholders. Then the other thing that was introduced with King 4, and this is something that I like quite a lot, is integrated thinking. And this takes into account the interconnectivity and interdependence of a range of factors that affect the organization and its ability to create value over time. So integrated thinking is especially important when it comes to your annual report and reporting on the performance of the organization. And it looks at broader things than just your financials and the financial performance. We look at sustainability, ethics, and social, and a whole bunch of other things that we are required to report on under King, which gives a much broader and clearer view to your stakeholders of the entity's performance over the financial year. And then lastly, and I think this is a buzzword everywhere at the moment, is sustainable development. And this is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of our future generations to meet their needs. So in a nutshell, this is what King is about. The 16 principles go into quite a lot of detail in terms of the practices that you could implement, as well as the disclosures that are required for each of the principles. Then just looking at the core principles, so as mentioned, there are 17 in total, but I will focus on the 16, which is applicable to most organizations. And they are really centered around the concepts of leadership, and as I said earlier, especially effective and ethical leadership. Ethics as a whole, we've mentioned corporate citizenship. Then the company's strategy and performance is also important. We look at reporting, not only within the annual report, but the importance of internal reporting being accurate to enable your board members to make effective decisions while being duly informed, and also reporting to your stakeholders to ensure that accurate information is shared to give a clear understanding of the organization's performance, as well as the ability to create sustainable value into the future. Then King 4 also does focus quite a bit on risk management, and then there is a very big focus on IT governance and board oversight that is required for proper IT governance. So just looking at King 5 and the differences from that we see between King 4 and King 5. So our 17 principles have been reduced to 12, and they've put in a lot of effort to simplify the language and clarify the principles so that it's more user-friendly and accessible to a large base of stakeholders. And I'm really so excited that the codes have been simplified and that they've combined the principles, because it means that there's less duplication, which is something that we did experience in King 4, especially when it comes to the disclosures. And as an enthusiastic supporter of plain language, I'm especially happy that they have simplified the language to make it more accessible. They've taken out a lot of the jargon, and it really is a much easier read for anyone that is interested in the topics. So for me, this is really a big step in the right direction to make this code accessible and to ensure that it's easily interpreted so that it can be applied without too much hassle. Something else that they've added on King 4 and King 5, which we didn't have on King 4, is the disclosure template, which I also think is a great addition, because the previous disclosures were contained within the principles and they weren't clear in terms of what was required. So you had all types of organizations reporting differently, which means that it wasn't comparable. And some organizations didn't report at all because they just didn't know how to. And this basically still requires that we do our disclosures, but they've given a template and it's set out in a very nice narrative form. And you just complete the template and then you add that into your annual report, and that would then form your disclosure or meet the disclosure requirement. So this really is to assist organizations with both the internal monitoring and implementation of the practices. And it also helps to then enhance accountability. Then there is also an aim to deepen ESG and to enhance sustainability reporting. So this is, as I said earlier, this really is a buzzword at the moment, and it's something that a lot of companies are driving. So we definitely do see that enhanced in King 5. And then with digital governance, this has been updated due to the rapid technological advancements we've recently experienced, especially around AI, cybersecurity, and all of that. And King 5 has basically made that the explicit responsibility of the board and says that the board has to have oversight. It's no longer just considered an IT issue. This is actually a board issue to ensure that there is effective IT governance within the organization. If we look at these changes, there's a lot of King 4 that still stays the same in King 5, which I think eases the transition for those that are already applying King 4 to King 5 to ensure that you remain compliant. And for those that would like to start now, I think I would recommend to wait for King 4, for King 5 to be released, since the language and application would be easier than that of King 4. And it's just important to note that King 5 also makes a point to say that it applies beyond listed companies, and it really does include all state-owned enterprises, local governments, nonprofits, and SMEs. So they have been given a lot of thought during the drafting process. So it's not just for listed companies or companies that prescribe to the Companies Act. It also applies to our PFMA and MFMA entities. So in terms of SCM governance, as custodians of public funds, our decisions can really shape our nation's future. And if we look at this, governance in the public sector is largely dependent at this stage on the BAC Code of Conduct. And it's quite an old document, and I would just like to take you all through the differences between what King 4 recommends as best practice and what the BAC Code of Conduct requires as it stands. So first off, the King reports really do emphasize that the chair needs to lead with impartiality. They need to foster participation and ensure governance alignment, sorry. And the BAC Code of Conduct says that the chairs are more of an administrative role in terms of managing meetings, ensuring quorum, finalizing decision, and although they do have casting votes or certain veto rights, they often lack the role to provide guidance on ethical dilemmas or mentoring to the committees as the meetings go on. So I think it's really important to consider mandating chairs to uphold our King principles, as this would enhance transparency and fairness and would make for more effective chairpersons for both BACs and importantly BECs. I don't think that BECs should be left out of this conversation. Secondly, I think, and a very important one, is that the chair should not, in terms of King, chairs should not be given a casting vote. So they don't recommend that the chairperson has any special vote or second vote or casting vote, because they see the chair as facilitating the objective decision making of the committee and not necessarily a dominator that should have the final say and impose their views on the committee. In terms of BAC Code of Conduct, we know that they do say that our chairs are given a casting vote and similar powers, and this may very well result in the chairperson dominating decisions. So another thing that I would definitely recommend that practices be aligned with the King 4 recommendations rather than the BAC Code of Conduct. And then just lastly, an important thing that would also then come through is that this would require the reporting of ethical issues to oversight bodies by the board chairperson, which I don't think is currently a requirement by BAC chairs. So this really does place your chair as a governance champion rather than a purely procedural lead. So I think very much the same in terms of the role of secretariat. In terms of King 4, secretariats are SCM's governance backbone. And King 4 shows that they are so much more than just minute takers. In terms of SCM, we often see the secretariat role as a minute taker and not a governance enabler. And they are positioned as an administrative role rather than someone that contributes to the governance of the process. So the purpose of a secretariat would really be to enable governance through compliance, the ethical facilitation and decision support that secretariats can offer to chairpersons. And this really is not administrative. It helps to ensure that our bid processes are transparent and auditable. So it's important to think about redefining this role as a process guardian in order to add strategic value. If I can just maybe at this point highlight how this was done in my time at the PPECB, and I think something that works quite effectively is as a legal advisor, we would step in as the secretariat for BECs and BACs. So that ensures that there is that bit of separation of powers. It elevates your secretariat role when you use a legal resource, because with that governance experience, you have enhanced minutes that are accurate and will more likely stand up in court. We have someone that's objective and independent to observe the process and that can identify risks easily. Someone that understands the case law that applies to bid committees and the decisions that are taken there. And I think it really takes it away from that administrative view of secretariat and enhances it to align it to what King 4 recommends a secretariat must do. So looking at the gaps in terms of our BAC and BEC chairs and the secretariats of the committee, I think it's important that we can shape SCM governance by using King as a framework and a guideline for our SCM governance. So updating policies and procedures and practices to align with what King 4 recommends as best practice, or King 5 if you are not already applying King 4 within your business. And then redefining that role as the process guardian in order to add strategic value. So you grow this role from being administrative to putting someone in place that is a custodian of the governance of SCM and ensures legal compliance as well. And lastly, I think something very positive is this also provides us for some positive reporting opportunities within the annual report. So often in terms of reporting wasteful and fruitless expenditure and your all your SCM things in the finance report, we now have the opportunity to report on other things that the SCM unit is doing to promote governance within the organization, and small things that can contribute. So in essence, I think that King 4 has, and the anticipated King 5 really has the potential to redefine SCM governance as we know it, just by elevating the role of the chair and the secretariat within bid committees. I think public entities and municipalities and our departments can really enhance their governance in a small way, or it's a small thing to do, and it will enhance your governance significantly. And it's really essential for our public sector and our economy that we implement and follow governance best practices, because these really do benefit the organization as well as the society in which the organization operates. But on that note, this is an incredibly deep topic that I'm very passionate about, and I think we've barely scratched the surface. I really just wanted to give a high-level overview of the King Codes and how they do interplay with SCM governance. And I think at this point, we will open the floor up for some discussion. Let's reimagine SCM together. I really feel like your insights matter. And I do have some questions on my side to get the discussion going, but if there are any questions from the floor, I will take those first.
Thanks, Jana. Well done. And if I could put a question to you, your second last bullet point on the recommendations, 2 slides before this one, was around the positive reporting. Yeah, because SCM too much is irregular expenditures, where we're failing. That's the kind of only times we really. But do you have some examples that you've been thinking of what kind of positive reporting might happen?
So I think if you look at the disclosures as required in King, you have to apply each principle. So I think if you implement these practices within your SCM governance process, then you can disclose that in your annual report. So you can add things like, during the financial year, the SCM unit has started implementing King 4 principles, and this is how they did it. They elevated the role of the chair, they elevated the role of secretariat, and things like that. I think if you do things like have a robust plan for minimizing wasteful and fruitless expenditure, you can also slot those in. So I think it's important for SCM practitioners to go and look at what those disclosures require. And that's where this template gives us a very nice framework, because you don't have to go pick them out of King 4. If you look at King 5, the narratives that they suggest there, that would give you an idea of where you can go look in your SCM processes, where the SCM unit does contribute to your overall governance of the organization. Because, we are an important department within the greater organization, and SCM does contribute. You would also look at what your focus areas are for the year to come. So look at what the King requirements are, pick 1 or 2, and just focus on doing those for the year. You can then report at the year end that you have met your focus areas. So it really would depend on institution to institution exactly what practices or drives they would disclose there. But I think the general thing of it is just look at how does your SCM unit support overall corporate governance for your organization and compliance in that regard.
Very good. And then you picked on 2 areas in SCM. One is the role of the chairperson in the bid committees, and the second one was the role of the secretariat. If I'm not mistaken, the code, the BAC code actually says the chairperson has a deliberate vote and a casting vote. So that means they can vote initially when we're voting, if we're voting, and then if there's a tie, they can vote again.
Again, yeah.
Yeah. So that's quite powerful. But King, you're saying, is not suggesting the chairperson, is suggesting the chairperson should not be voting at all. Now, do you think that possibly is one of the levers and mechanisms that can be used to reduce corruption that is taking place in supply chain?
Yes, I definitely think so. I think it's with good reason that King has stipulated and set this out. And I think looking at the journey that they've taken from 1992 and the first King reports up to now, there's been a lot of focus on the board, on the chair of a board. So I think that it's important to note that the role of the chair is I want to say more of a referee. They shouldn't
Mm,
be in the fight. They should rather stand on the outside and
mm,
facilitate that objective discussion, to ensure that decision making is fair and sound, and that everyone has been given a chance and a voice to be heard on the committee.
interesting.
Also, you run the risk of them obviously dominating the discussion and then just casting their second vote to get their way or force
Yeah,
their
yeah.
opinion rather than the committee deciding together after a robust debate and coming to the most objective conclusions, I would say.
And particularly where we've got this notion of joint and several liability, it becomes even more important
Yeah.
in that space. And then your other point was around the secretariat. Now, did you fulfill the role of secretariat at PPECB?
Yes, I did.
On
Along with my colleague Prissy
BSCs?
Chalingwana, I think she's also on the call, so the both of us. And we would swap between the two of us. So I would take one, she would take one. And then that also helped in terms of contract drafting because we could provide input from the process to the other who would then draft the contract for that service.
Very interesting. And are you suggesting that possibly SCM should almost have kind of proper training SCM practitioners and those involved on King 4 and actually understand that, number one, and number two, or are you suggesting that that we need to get a legal advisor in on all SCM kind of initiatives? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that especially with King 5, the language and everything used there is simple enough that you would be able to train SCM practitioners to fulfill the role, even with King 4. I think it's just we used a legal resource just at that time due to other factors as well, but I believe using an SCM resource would obviously make most sense in a lot of institutions where they're already using an administrative resource. And then just to train those people up in terms of understanding King for what their role actually is and how to implement that. And I think to also maybe open a line of discussion with your legal department or your governance department for that person so that they can contact them should they have any questions or need explanation on case law or something that is out of the scope of the SCM committee in that regard. But I don't see why a procurement official can't fulfill that role. It's definitely not necessary for each committee to now have a legal resource that also sits in the meetings.
Good. Thank you. I've got another question, but you had some thoughts that you wanted to pose just as some discussion points. Do you want to put some of those out and let's see if we get some response back?
I see Tadley has a hand.
There we are. Let's go for it.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was quite informative. Interestingly, Sean, my master's research was on the King Code in terms of how does it fit into the public sector space. And my view was that you can't fit a circle inside of a square. One of the two has to be reshaped somehow. What I liked about the King 4 is that when you look at the principle of public sector, it was more about the terminology aligning the two. So the King Code was basically saying that we're not saying there's nothing in government, but we're trying to measure so that you understand what we are talking about. In the municipal space, when we say a governing body, we're talking about a municipal council. In the NGO, when you talk about, meaning that such governance structures or such governance legal framework is in existence. So there's nothing, okay, no, nothing's not the right word. There's not really much a distinction, or don't think just because there's no king code in your space, you have nothing that you can use as a reference for governance. It's there. Now, I like the comment about the role of the chairperson, that they be the coordinator of discussion, but you must also remember that in BEC, the chairperson does not vote. In BEC, we score, we add those points, and then the points will determine where it goes. They probably might vote on administrative issues. So it might be on BA and BS. But there's a mention of the secretariat role, and this is why I'm saying you can't fit a circle in a square. I think you need to understand the secretarial role in the context of government and SCM, what it means. The secretariat in procurement space, it is an administrative role. You're trying to fit to link a corporate secretary with a secretary in the bid committee. Those are two different things. A corporate secretary in the King Code space is the custodian of governance, of corporate governance. And most of the time, it's a legal person, because that is the person who's the custodian of any compliance dynamics that needs to happen there. It's even the minute taker that you would have in a board will be reporting to the corporate secretary. You're hardly going to find a corporate secretary taking a minute. So I think that we need to just be careful about that distinction. Let's not leave out the word corporate, because there is a reason why they are called corporate secretaries. They're not just secretaries. Now, in our environment, we have your secretary that is used everywhere in corporates to say a secretary is like your minute taker, somebody who deal with the administrative aspect of this function. But what I need to highlight is that there are mechanisms to ensure governance in the SCM committee system. We've had instances even where AG will raise a finding where you have a secretariat only as a representation from SCM without an additional SCM person to provide advice on SCM matters, because the secretariat is not intended for that purpose. And if we say that we give that secretariat, and then another thing is that in government, because we have capacity constraint, we can have one secretary for all the three committees, because this person is purely for administrative purpose. But if you want to bring in governance in, then you'll bring a custodian of governance. Could be someone from risk, it could be somebody from SCM, it could be someone from audit, and all of that. And this is where, now, if we want to have this conversation of trying to fit a king in the governance space, can we then take a step back and say, let's look how government is structured? Because remember, the biggest problem here is not necessarily about the laws. One thing that we always make a mistake on is that when something goes wrong, we go and change the laws. The problem is ethics. We need to just change our conduct. If we can change our conduct, we'll be fine. But every time when you keep changing laws, we make it harder and harder and harder for decision-making to happen, and even harder for accountability. So currently, there's a framework in place, and hence I'm saying that what I like about the King 4 is to appreciate that framework. So maybe and of course it needs improvement. That one, it's a given. It needs improvement, but let's not pitch it such that we need to do an entire overhaul when we actually overhauling what is in existence. So with secretary in bid committee environment, it's a completely different thing from a corporate secretary. And you do find some organs of state in their bid evaluation, they will have a legal person. In adjudication, some they'll have a legal person. Others, they'll have the entire process without legal. And then before the accounting officer sign, they'll submit the process to audit or probity or legal or whatever. So there are those controls in place. It's just that it packaged in a different way. That's why I'm saying that don't try to fit a circle in a square. At some point, something's going to have to reshape some way. But thanks, I do like the idea of the chairperson. I think it's something that definitely one can look at, because I mean we do have dominating characters in these committees, and they really influence and drive, and things end up in a certain way when they were not supposed to be. So now if you have a chair that just coordinates discussions, and the beauty of it is that when you have a chairperson like that, you might not even need an SCM person to actually coordinate these discussions. I mean, if you look at boards, anybody can chair a board, you know. So once you do it in that fashion, it becomes independent in a way, and then things can be done correctly. Thank you.
Good one. Thanks, Tondi. Let's jump to Kha, and then we'll ask Jana to respond. Kha, welcome.
Thanks. Sure.
Thanks, Chair. I think I can't say it more better than how Tondi put it. how, especially in terms of corporate secretary and secretary in the space of SCM. I think she said it all. I don't need to reiterate it. My challenge, however, is this. And I'll make an analogy. Imagine you are in court, and I'm happy that the presenter, and thanks for the presentation, has got a legal background. Imagine having a court interpreter who tries to interpret to the judge or to the bench, and using their own understanding, legal understanding of what is being argued.
Sure.
That analogy will not work in our space. The secretary is there to capture the deliberations of BAC, and not incorporate their legal or professional or corporate understanding of what is being discussed. Because the respondents here are the people who have got a voting right. Now, that is my fear when it comes to secretariat. And I think, as I say, I can't say it better than how Tandy put it. We cannot fit a circle into a square. Now, when it comes to BAC as well, and I would like to use the same analogy of the court. Imagine having a judge who, yes, is supposed to be objective, but who cannot make a ruling. Just because they need to be objective, they shouldn't be able to make a ruling. And if you take that analogy and incorporate it again into our space where we are saying King is advising that the chairperson of the BAC should not have a casting vote, it means they are just there to facilitate. It is not the reason. And I'm happy when you open the King's report, you'll find that they include the Constitution, and specifically they will talk to integrity in terms of what it means, and they will quote or cite Section 195 of the Constitution, which governs how management or governance in government should be. So this person should be, who's the chairperson, should be proficient in that Section 197 and should be able to say, here is a deadlock. In terms of the principles of 195, I'm making a ruling. So if you take that casting vote away from them, I think they will not be adhering to their obligations in terms of Section 195 of the Constitution. My only challenge, again, the last point that I'm making, having read King 4 and also what is proposed in King 5, King 4 takes the Constitution, or the King reports, take the Constitution, I don't know what term to use, but let me put it this way. We are a transformatory constitutional state. We are in transformation. We are not yet. If you look at the King report, you will never find that word. It is as if we are a private sector institution. No, we are not. There is things that needs to be, that we are transforming from, and that we are trying to reparate or correct. So that is my problem with the King report, if you are trying to incorporate it as is into the public sector, because we are not a private sector where it is the profit-driven and whatever, stock exchange, and we are trying to correct something here. And once you do not recognize that there is a transformation to be made in our governance, then you are missing something. You're taking a constitution from a developed or whatever world that has never had problems or fewer problems like we have, trying to say there is a clean slate in South Africa. We must move in this direction. That is my last point. Thank you, Chair.
I've got some questions for you, Carl, but let's hear from Jana first on her thoughts.
No, thank you for that. I think Tandu and how a very interesting discussion, and I do agree that currently the role of secretariat within BACs, BECs is very much administrative. I think it was more just to compare what the possibilities are out there of changing and possibly enhancing what our current structures are, because if we are honest, the current structures are not always effective. And I don't think that it always necessarily needs to be the secretariat role. I think the idea would just be to have someone there with governance knowledge. As you mentioned, there are legal resources and other resources that are pulled in, but the intention was just to show that there is disparities between King 4 and what's considered best practice, and what the current situation or practices are within our space. And sorry, I just want to check my notes here. As you were talking. Then so you can still elevate your governance of your committee by just including some resource that it has independent observation of the process and has the extra knowledge in terms of governance and risk. You also mentioned you could use a risk resource just as effective. Doesn't necessarily need to be a legal person, but I do feel that there are certain basic governance principles that you could teach your administrative secretariats that would already take steps toward enhancing governance. In terms of minute taking, ensuring that there are certain standards and templates and things that are adhered to understand how that could affect admissibility in court, for instance, and things like that, just to ensure that that role isn't forgotten and it's not just seen as you're just there for taking minutes, because at the end of the day, the minutes also serve a purpose for the process, in terms of capturing what happened there. Then just on to the point on the casting vote, although, and this is to Gail's point, although the casting vote is not recommended as a practice in terms of King 4, it's not prohibited. So it doesn't say that board members cannot take a casting vote. And I do agree that there is situations where it would be necessary for the chairperson to veto a decision or whatever, but these would then need to happen within the conscripts of other legislation, as you mentioned, the Constitution. So there are other frameworks that you would rely on when implementing that, and it's not just a willy-nilly, I have the power to cast a deliberate and a second vote or whatever. It's it just contains that freedom a bit more to say that when you do use this power, it needs to be in line with other legislation to ensure fairness, transparency, accountability, and all of that. And then just on the last concept on reparations, and that there's no mention of that within King, I disagree with you respectfully. I think that although it's not mentioned in the terminology that we speak of in especially public sector South Africa, if you look at concepts like your corporate citizenship and the societal impact that you need to consider, the operating as part of society, all of those sections in terms of King would, in my opinion, promote this reparations, because that is part of our society and that is part of our country's history. So that's where those would come in, and it would really be up to organizations to implement practices in terms of enhancing our drive towards this within the principles as set out by King, which talk to then corporate citizenship and all of that. So how do we as an organization support transformation? And then that becomes something that you then drive through the King principles, and you can then later also report on in a more strategic way, because you will set out your focus areas for the year and then how you've achieved them at the end of the financial year. So although there's not specific mention, and I do think that there could be more of a focus, especially since this is a South African document. But I think that we can possibly read it into those sections and rely on that to drive transformation, reparations, all of that. I hope that answers that.
Good one. Thanks, Jana. Let's if we can, Gail, if you wouldn't mind coming back. So we're at a point now where we have had bid committees for some 20 years. And this is quite a unique governance structure in procurement globally, right? There aren't other jurisdictions that have the same kind of bid committee structure that we have in South Africa. We are entering now into a point where we've got the Public Procurement Act, which will have regulations coming through, and those regulations must prescribe how the bid committees will work. What do you think we could do differently, should do differently? And is there anything, how you've read both reports, is there anything that you think we could take from King and make changes in how, for example, the Secretariat or the Secretary approaches or SCM approaches governance in an SCM perspective? So that's a question for Hal. And if Thandi wants to come in, welcome as well. Just some, I appreciate some of your thoughts, because we've got this this key point, Hal, where we've got changes coming down the line. We can change things now. Hal, any thoughts?
Thanks, Chair. You're right. Having read King report and some of us trying to live by its advice or what it contains, there is a lot that you can take from King reports and incorporate. Because if you look at the recent cases, when you stand there and you need to say as a bid committee member, what was your intent or your understanding in coming to this conclusion? It needs integrity, which values are also incorporated in the Constitution to say, whatever you do, you should do with integrity and impartiality. So where we fail, I think King report can substantiate or just support where we fail probably to incorporate those values, which are already in the Constitution. But I think the broader interpretation or the wider interpretation we can import from the King report. But as I'm saying, I still have a challenge, especially so with regard to the King report, because I don't think social responsibility is what the crumbs that I'm looking for from the King's report. I expect it to change the JSC, to change the corporate world in the understanding and the background of where we come from. Not just say, okay, we'll do this and then you'll get us crumbs. No. But yes, there is a lot that we can take and incorporate from the King report in terms of governance of the BAC and the BSCs, as well as the Secretariat. There is something to learn from corporate secretaries, how they conduct themselves. There is a lot, although you cannot say they should be the same, but you can learn a lot from them. And the corporate secretaries are governed in the King, clearly so in the King report, which is what we are lacking when it comes to public sector, committee secretariat or membership.
Good one.
I think I'll go that far. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. Let's jump to Mike, a quick one from Mike, and then we go to Pali.
Just before, I just want to say, Carl, we hope that you commented with your comments now mentioned on King 5 for consideration, because I agree with you that there is a gap there, and it is important that we do address it, especially considering this is a South African document. So I hope you commented.
Good one. Good one.
Let's move on. Thanks.
Good one. Well done. Mike, and then we'll jump to Pali. Hello, Mike.
Yeah. Hi, Sean. Just a question here. We have all these wonderful sets of documents and regulations, but where is the consequence management? South Africa suffers from consequence management, not from lack of systems. I mean, the Auditor General's reports paint a horror story, and it just persists. And we can have King 20,000,001, but if there is no consequence management, nothing is actually going to change or improve.
Good one. Thanks, Mike. Any thoughts, Jana? And then we'll jump to Polly.
I unfortunately don't have an answer for you in terms of improving that. I think it's a conundrum that we're all scratching our heads over. But I think that's where, in terms of King, where your board training and your appointments to your board is so important at the end, because the buck does really stop with them, and you would also need that accountability to filter down from there. So I think the answer in your question might lie in board appointments, how your boards are constructed, and all of that. But other than that, I also don't have a quick fix solution to say this is how we're going to improve consequence management. Unfortunately, I think that's a very difficult and broad topic to unpack here.
Thanks, Jana. Let's jump to Polly. Good morning, Polly. Welcome. Nice to have you join us. You can. There
yeah,
we
good
are.
morning. Good morning, Sean, and good morning to the colleagues. A well-informed and presented presentation. I just wanted to add on my colleague Khao in terms of the approach of the King report into government operations, to say there is a lot of work and alignment that need to be done in order to bring in the concept of King 4 report into government operations, because it is more on corporate, and we need then to work in aligning government operations, especially from SCM and governance part, bring the concepts into government, but not forgetting the difference in terms of corporate and government operations. And that will help in terms of government being able to align its corporate governance in government, in terms of SCM and corporate governance. That's my take. Thanks, Sean.
Good one. Thank you, Polly. Polly, any thoughts on the extent to which the King reports is influencing some of the work on the regulations going ahead at the moment? Or too early to say?
I would love to say the teams that are working on regulations.
Yeah.
As you also know that we have experts, we have different people on different teams. So there is a whole host of considerations, not only
sure,
confined to other and not considering others. So there is a whole host of considerations of all pieces of legislation that may influence the drafting of regulations. Thanks.
Thank you. Quick one from Thandi Khao, and I've got a question I've got to ask you, Jana. So let's just get Thandi and Khao to come through. Thandi?
Thanks, Sean. I think on answering the issue on consequence management, you remember the whole spirit of the King Code. It was intentional for it not to become an act.
Yeah.
The whole idea, it was just to try to build in the culture of ethical conduct and be something that is voluntary, not to force people where there's punitive measures towards that. I like what I like about the King Code is how detailed it is on the responsibilities of ethical leadership, as well as the custodian of the governance of an organization as a whole, which now moves to your normal council or boards and whatever. But for your bid committees, if you want to bring it back to the bid committees, it then comes back to the previous speaker to say that. I remember when I was doing my research, one of the interviewees was, Thandi, why do you say corporate governance? How about talk about public governance? And then maybe when you say public governance, and then we start talking specifically to the public sector, because if you look at the King Code is pitched at the governing body. It's purely the
board.
governing board in terms of how the entire organization is being governed, as well as the subcommittees of the board. But there's not necessarily, now when you talk about your bid committees, you're now talking to the operations, which is something that is left to the CEO, of course, believing that is an ethical person. So everything is left to the CEO at his discretion to kind of see how to best run the organization. So now if we want to bring it into the SCM, then maybe we need to have that conversation to say, when we talked about public governance, there's other governance structures within the operations under the CEO that one would want to maybe have a conversation in terms of how they should be guided. Thank you.
Good one. Good one. How?
Just shortly on consequence management, just very short. You see, we tend to have a crucify him mentality when it comes to public sector. Look what KPMG them did. If you read the Zondo report, the audit firms, Ernst & Young and Pricewaterhouse, look what their impact. Did you hear the word crucify? I am not saying in government it should be laissez-faire. But when we talk consequence management, let's balance it. Let's balance it out, because the same audit firms and regulators who are from the private sector, they have got a hand in how public servants conduct themselves. I think the King report, the way I understand it, in terms of morality and integrity, is to say you are a doctor, you are an accountant, you are this profession in engineer. If you construct this building, have you looked at your capacity? Have you looked at the risk of injuring other people, or the risk that you can do to the economy as whatever profession you are? The danger is you will hear consequence management being shouted to the roof of the top when it comes to public sector. And when it comes to Auditor General's reports, please, if I have bought a bottle of water or a car, and the car is there, or I've built a house or an office block, it is there, people are in it. The only mistake that I did not do was to ask for 3 quotations. Should I be crucified?
Yeah, that's a big issue.
Just because the Auditor General says it is irregular?
Yeah.
The goods and products are on. So we should read even the AGSA's reports with an understanding of what irregular is and put it into context. Where there is no playground and 50 million has been spent, yes, we can shout to the top of our ears, but we should read it in context and not say AG says 50 million has been wasted, but the product is on the ground, people are in there, there is only the procedural things that so please, when we talk consequence management, let's balance it out. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Carl. Jana, let me ask my question. So in the delegation of authority that we often put together, many organs of state have a typical threshold process that says that any transaction above this level must be authorized by the board. So it would go, CFO and CEO and then board. There are some public entities that have said, well, that's operational, and that shouldn't be a board responsibility. And some are saying that that's exactly what the board should not be doing, is getting involved in making those final decisions on those big contracts. We don't want those guys that have been appointed and might be political appointees to make the decisions on those big contracts. And so some have started to change their delegation of authority to not push that big tender up to the board to make that final decision. Any thoughts from yourself? Any thoughts in King 5 as to the role of the board in that kind of approval step?
So, no, thanks, Sean. That's a very good question. I didn't read it with that particular question in mind, so I will definitely have to have a look in terms of what King 5 says on that. From just my personal feeling, I would agree that the board it is operational for the board, and that, you know, they really should be advising or deciding on the strategy surrounding the need for these contracts, or the framework within which the contracts are required. But I don't think that they should have a say in the appointment ultimately of the contract or not, just because of the value.
Yeah. It's gonna be an interesting one. I know that some have attempted to do that, but boards don't like that. They want to make, you know, they want to have a say in those kinds of contracts, and that's where we're having problems. And that's certainly what I've seen. That's when many problems start to creep in.
No, definitely. And I think especially because they then come in operationally and have different views on perhaps the recommended bidder or things like that. And that opens your process up for more risk in the end if there is a review of the process. And there needs to be that separation as well between operational and strategic. And I don't believe that it's something that should go to board. And I think it causes more harm than good more often than what it does to eliminate or minimize fraud or corruption or anything. I don't think that it's an effect. Opposite.
Yeah. Let's go to Mike. We'll ask Mike for his last comment, and then I'm going to ask Jana to just close off with some of her thoughts, next steps, and then we'll close off the day. Thank you, Mike.
Sorry, I agree that there's a big difference between irregular and fruitless expenditure. Irregular expenditure produces a result, and it's usually a sort of minor irregularity in many instances. Fruitless expenditure is actually a waste of taxpayers' money, which should be recouped from the guilty party. But what I live in the Eastern Cape, and I can give you an example which actually continues to baffles everybody. Come to about November, December, there are a number of government departments that send out letters to contractors, consultants, and people who they employ, stating that until April, they will not have money to pay. So basically, you as a business, if you do business with the government, you work for 8 months and you accumulate sufficient funds to see you through 12 months. Now, you know, that's what I'm saying. We as a this is not, it happens year in, year out. So somebody must work out a budget, somebody must control the expenditure, and yet there is an ongoing failure. And it's not only the Eastern Cape. I don't want to criticize government. I sound like a stuck record, but you know, if this was a private sector business, they would be out of business. There is no conception in certain spheres of government as to how the relationship between good governance, budgets, procurement, economics, paying your suppliers, and all those integrated things work out. And, you know, either you train people, and if they don't want to be trained, then you've got to hit them with a stick. You can't just dangle a carrot forever.
Thanks, Mike. Good one. There's a case that we will be discussing in 3 weeks' time around the cancellation of a contract because they ran out of budget, particular municipality. So we will have that discussion, and looking forward to that one. Jana, fascinating discussion. Thank you for this, and I agree with you. You probably just scratched the surface. There's a lot more that we could all learn from this. Some of your closing comments.
No, I think thank you very much for the questions and for the opportunity to present today, and for the discussions. It's always nice when there are questions at the end, and it's definitely given me a few things to think about as well. But I think just from my side, just encouraging, you know, everyone out there, if you don't have to do a full-scale implementation of applying King 4, but have a look at the principles, have a look at the practices, and see what you can incorporate into your SCM. I think every drop in the bucket, you know, adds up to improve governance. And even if it's just the small things at first, you know, they will add up and they will contribute. and perhaps not in ways that you expect. I think also just thinking about King 5 and what we expect to see there. I haven't really checked the process and where they are at the moment. I didn't have time to do that this morning. But if there is another round for comments, to perhaps to take these comments to the committee for consideration, because they are important. And if King wants to say that it is applicable to municipalities and public entities, then they need to assure that they draft it in a way that makes it easily applied and that speaks to these entities and doesn't just speak to our private sector corporates as it currently does. And then I think just lastly, just to invite the idea of think about your team and how you guys are doing things at the moment, and just identify one step that you can take towards alignment with King. If that's starting with your chair, that would be great, but it doesn't have to be. There are lots of others that you can do that are easy, low hanging fruit that you can implement just to improve governance. So that's it from my side. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jana. Thank you for the preparation that you've put into this morning, and all the very best to you on your next journey. Hey? Where are you going to be in the US?
Wisconsin.
Very good. Enjoy it. And are you coming back?
Yeah, well, after 2 years, hopefully. Yeah.
Good one.
I hope so.
Thanks, Jana. All the best to you. Thank you. And some great thanks coming in from everybody. Thank you.